I'm going to be reading today from Who's Wellness for my book that came out last year. This is actually not really the title, or the cover. I took it off. And I just want to say that the chapter I'm going to read is called On IBS. It's chapter 8, and it's a bit of an intense chapter, and the book is quite intense as well. So I just wanted to pre-warn folks in the audience. And with that, I'll start reading. On IBS. My gut issues started at 14. The blistering palpitations, the wretched, unruly heat my stomach would generate like a nuclear bomb site. It would take over my life when it came, penetrating every pore, causing so much chaos in my body, and pain that would last for days on end. After the first few months of this, I began to see and feel this visceral connection between my mother and me whenever I had an onset of IBS. Like she could short circuit my body, bringing me to my knees just through her mind. I could feel her even when she wasn't close, because that's how connected we were. That was the first explanation I had for my IBS, even as a teenager. It didn't make sense, but in my universe, I guess it did. When I first spoke to my sister about what was happening, I would tell her it was like I could feel my mother's rage in my stomach, like a galactic swirl, except it wasn't a black hole of cramps, like a bat signal, and my body would come and go at a whim, exiting me in shreds like a hurricane leaving a small town. The weak core, my white yoga teacher pointed out, as a result of trauma, intergenerational and my own, which is a stored physical energy in my body that was perhaps created as an energetic entry point by my mother. I don't know how else to explain it other than there were no boundaries between us. I was so porous to her, and because she controlled every action and watched every move, my body became controlled by her moods and needs. My IBS, I believe, became a direct embodiment of this. I felt so powerless around her, primarily because I had been conditioned to believe by her that she was an authority figure, God, so much so that she could punish me even when I wasn't physically close to her. I was the perfect compliant captive because I believed her. I believed in her power over me. In the chakra system, IBS is directly located where the solar plexus resides, and a blocked solar plexus represents low self-esteem, shame, and unworthiness. I mean, you can't make this shit up. In the world of health and wellness, there is an inconsistent belief that if you try hard enough at something, eventually you will see results. What's so dangerous about this thinking is that when a body can't do certain things because of its sometimes unknown limitations, that body is then subtly or not so subtly societally ostracized. Just by virtue of the world being catered to able-bodiedness, we forget bodies are still valuable, irrespective of what they can or cannot do. Chronic pain became a safe way to engage with my body at a distance. It was an added buffer, a shield for me. When I was focusing on one pain, I wasn't looking at the other. As the Buddha reminds us, if the body is not cultivated, the mind cannot be cultivated. If the body is cultivated, then the mind can be cultivated. I wasn't finding balance because I was in constant avoidance of myself. The body's pain was a way to deflect the mind's trauma. Yet the irony is that your body keeps a score because your mind wants to forget the tally. Even if we are unconscious to it, what we experience becomes stored quantitative data. As a result, well into adulthood, I lived in fear all the time. I never felt safe. I became hypervigilant to my body's sensations, yet I was also completely confused by what I felt. The pain didn't add up to the memory or vice versa. Such sharp attention and awareness are a product of abuse, as your body is always tuning into the possibility of attack. But because nothing has identified the root of the issue, you go into overdrive, believing everything could be a possible violator. I had to be prepared to defend myself at any time, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally. Living like this was an impossible reality. The more I thought about it, however, the more I came to realize that the gut is the home of intuition, and therefore I had to learn how to trust mine. Now I understand that my mother's abuse had created a bond that had morphed into a portal that linked me directly to her. I hated that she could do this. I hated how thin-skinned I was. I already felt surveilled and on constant edge, frightened that she was always watching me. All of this resulted in a hazing of my body, especially where my stomach was and all the sexual parts of myself. If I veiled myself, if I self-actualized into a blob, something out of Hayao Miyazaki's universe, I wouldn't have to feel her conquer me. When I started cutting, it became another distraction. If I cut myself somewhere I could control, then the pain would numb the stomach pain. It was a constant cyclical void of pain I existed in. Instead of listening to what my body was trying to tell me and not knowing I could learn how to listen to her, I turned on myself. This became a dynamic where I was then mistrustful of myself. Because the pain in my insides was not being validated by an authority figure, I was forced to believe that I was fine. When I would say I wasn't, my mother would eye me suspiciously, cocking her head only to tell me all the places she was hurt. But did I see her complaining? My father would deflect, kindly telling me I'd feel better soon, and why wouldn't I be? I wasn't starving. I had a home, 2 parents, food on the table. I knew I should be grateful, so I was. The good girl believed something like, one day mommy, daddy will be full and they will give me what I need. Bethany Webster writes aptly in Discovering the Inner Mother. The problem is that sometimes that day never comes. Instead, we become adults who experience high levels of stress when faced with everyday situations like disappointing someone, receiving compliments, setting boundaries, and taking care of themselves. So then, some part of you, the good girl, begins to believe, because you are constantly told that your parents know best, especially more than you, that one day they will see you for who you are, see how broken and frail you are, and yet how hard you try, but how much you really need them, how all you want is their good, loving, safe touch. You want to be a child. As an adult, this will mean that people won't even see the strain in your body. And like your parents, all they'll see is what they deem as success, never once questioning the impact it has had on your mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and sexual well-being to carry this much, to never be able to complain about what the cost has been on your psyche. So as a coping mechanism, because your parents don't witness you all the time, something inside of you begins to disconnect from your pain. Your sense of reality has to mimic theirs for your own survival. You begin to tell yourself that your needs are too much, and you convince yourself that the more perfect you are, that the more wholesome, morally upright, intelligent you are, you will be loved, cherished, and adored. So you go on a hamster wheel, trying to perfect yourself. In that process, you forget you are unwell, and that you have needs too. And you keep forgetting, and you keep forgetting. I've taught myself to perform in the face of extreme pain, dulling my senses. I've taught myself how to numb my body's quakes and shivers. I've hidden my true self, denied my body its right to speak to me, and participated in my own silencing, again and again. Until very recently, I realized it didn't have to be this way. I took my IBS as a sign of my inherent weakness, as if I was too broken to be given a real body, one that wasn't always in revolt. The ableist ideas of being healthy were drilled into my brain as well as my sister's, and the more our bodies revolted in different ways, the more we continued to be silenced by both our parents, or made fun of, as when our food allergies, bodily reactions were always read as exaggerations instead of real things that had been determined by our own bodies because we knew them best. My parents would call both my sisters and me extremists because of our sensitivities to gluten, sugar, and dairy, so I was forced to continue to eat normally or moderately so that I would grow accustomed to it, always being told that what my body knew to be true was again inherently wrong, or at the very least, amenable. I wish I had known earlier that if you compromise your own unknown needs for the tenacity of another's, there is always a personal cost. So the more I was that Fariha, the one that was together, composed, kind, but hidden, obstructed even from myself, the less I could be the full Fariha, the whole Fariha, the one that was also tender, angry, frustrated, tired, but desperately, sickeningly wanting of love. According to Webster, the used child within us longs to be loved for her real self, not just when she is wearing the mask of the good girl and demonstrating patriarchal values, productive, perfect, conforming to expectations, making others look good, sacrificing, suppressing. The used child longs to be loved when she disappoints you, when she is grumpy, when she is inconvenient, when she is messy, when she is confused, when she produces nothing, when she is inconsistent, when she is empty-handed, when she changes her mind. The reality I also found is that most adult humans I've encountered aren't very secure. Projections are always being placed. I found that I kept getting into circumstances where I would be intentionally misunderstood, or that I'd be put into positions where I would have to apologize for things I hadn't done just to keep the peace. This was my role as a negotiator. I was always the person who compromised, extended a hand, even when I was usually the one being misunderstood. This caused me to further shut down, to get deeper into the performance, out of a sense of defeat that no matter what, I was the one who would have to succumb to other people's power over me. In my life, healing has been about integrating the fragments of mind, body, and spirit that were shattered by trauma. As I nurtured all these disparate parts of myself together, a more honest version of me began to form. The more I thought about this on a micro level as an individual, the more I began to see a parallel between the earth and humans. If I could heal myself, and what I mean by this is largely about acceptance. It's healing to accept a failing body and tell that body, I love you unconditionally. Maybe we would have more proof for a way to collectively heal the earth too, because the earth, like our own bodies, needs so much love, nurturance, and gentleness from us. We are far more connected than we seem to think we are, to our families, to our ancestors, to our land. The path to healing as a South Asian is a multi-layered process. To deny us of our cultural roots, meaning our cultural and spiritual customs, means to rob us again and again. To keep us distracted, forgotten, it's to further the poison, to then co-opt, steal, and appropriate our culture is an ugly, unequal, and devastating consequence of a malice so great that to quantify it would mean an endless Nuremberg-style trial of naming the poison of the atrocities done to us. Repetition is the mute language of the abused or colonized person. The reality of this is that to move through this, to heal societally, to come to ourselves, and to heal our bodies means healing our lands, something that all of us, especially if you are a white-bodied person, must contribute to. It's your karma, and it is the responsibility to help us heal. That is the most significant gateway to your own healing. Displacing is a way of surviving. It is an impossible, truthful story of living in between regimens of truth, says writer and filmmaker Trinity Minha. So much of this book is about filling in the histories for other South Asians so that we may claim what is ours and instill a cultural recognition that we are better when we work together, when we can see the rich majesty of our lands, of who we are. We can't afford to keep forgetting. It's time that we remember. Being South Asian has sometimes felt like making work in exile. A lot of us have been tasked to reimagine what our futures are without knowing exactly where we come from. We are constantly faced with the gaps in our memories because of our incapacity to face ourselves. But I think it's time to look at these wounds. Awareness is not just in the mind, but also includes body language. Gloria Anzaldúa writes in Light in the Dark. Grasping my past, my ancestors and their past, collecting stories through my father has been a way to understand, to root myself into something. Through understanding them, I began to understand myself and why my body has been revolting for so long. My IBS was a way to understand my body on its own terms, not what I or society determined for it. My parents' attention was both harmful from my mother and negligent, non-existent from both. In care work, Samara Sinha reminds us that most of us had received shitty care, abusive care, care with strings attached, and most of us have been denied situations of vulnerability, opting for strength as the constant mirage. I imagine a lot of people look at me and see some kind of vulnerability and assume the ease that comes with it. It used to spill out of me like toxic waste, and I would have to embarrassingly clean up after the aftermath, the vomit on the floor. The number of times my vulnerability has been outright rejected, castigated, humiliated is endless. In New York, a lot of shitty encounters with people made me think that I had to harden myself. I've seen how easily people will blame me for things that have nothing to do with me, and it happens often. How quickly I've been relegated to crazy by former friends and lovers. That is the pursuit of an authentic life. To become yourself totally means you lose a lot of people along the way, because most people are incapable of sitting deeply with themselves. I've had to come to terms with that I wasn't the problem. Now I've realized boundaries are not only necessary, but that not everyone even deserves all of me. I don't have to be liked. I don't even have to try to be liked. I'm enough, just as I am. When you're a child of abuse, of trauma, what no one tells you is that you have to look out for yourself. That in itself is a product of the abuse. You are neglected, let alone your body. You have to learn what a checkbook is, how to do your taxes on your own, how to call 911 to save your own life. No one prepares you for the world, holds your hand or invites you to Sunday family dinners, celebrations, anniversaries. Birthdays become a tenuous, heartbreaking thing. And no matter how many people will tell you that they love you, there will still be those who won't understand what it feels like to be in a constant void, to exist in lovelessness, because the core of you yearns for that love you will never get. A mother's cognizant and lucid love. That's what it's like to always feel alone. It's to wonder who would save you if you were in the gutter right now and not have immediate, tangible answers. Recently, a healer told me that I shouldn't hold on to the pain of my life and childhood. I initially agreed, but then afterward felt a rage brewing. What people don't seem to understand when they tell me this is that ever since I showed sadness at 10, Everyone has wanted to tell me where to put it. Their discomfort with seeing a sad child usurped their desire to actually tend to that child's needs, to question how I was feeling. I've been abandoned by more people than I haven't. That hurts extra when you don't have a stable family unit, when you don't have a mother to cry on, turn to, learn from. This, not so ironically, is all related to the solar plexus. Feelings of betrayal, problems with forgiveness, and a lack of safety in oneself, a difficulty with staying in one's own personal power. Recently, I realized that my IBS had given me the infrastructure to unlock a lot of answers. The more I've turned myself over the last few years, the more I become and re-envision myself as my own being. Learning to become and understand my IBS and see what it was trying to speak to me. That it was reminding me that the PTSD and panic attacks weren't reflections of my hysteria, but rather a communication that I needed to decipher, made me realize that the vast layers of knowledge that are coded in unwellness, in chronic illness. But what if we listened? What if we paid attention? What if that's all healing is? Just listening to yourself. If so, what are you trying to tell yourself? So much of my life, I lived with this narrative that my body had failed me. That I mainly felt this way because I had been fed enough crap about the imperfection of my body since I was a child, that at a certain point, those criticisms adapted into my own thoughts. My mother would castigate me, calling me tumshi, which is analogous to fatty, something my sister would call me. Imagine a society that didn't feel the need to critique everyone's outward appearance. Imagine if we cared less about judging others and focused on how we can be active participants towards bettering our collective humanity. Imagine. These days I rest on this hope because I take solace in my own reckoning and my own leaps of faith and consequence. I keep thinking back to when I was 18, a few days before my 19th birthday, realizing I was pregnant. I had known for a while, or at least suspected it. And that was the next stage of disassociation from my body. I didn't understand why I couldn't be normal like other girls. Why was I always so bloated, always uncomfortable in my skin? I didn't want to live like this. I wanted to learn how to accept myself. I wanted to love what my body was, not what it wanted to be, which was a journey in and of itself, because my body itself has potentially always been in flux, and maybe that was okay. The IBS, as it has stretched out for almost 2 decades of my life, has recently become an exemplary signal that I follow. This chapter, in fact, has been the most difficult one. As I write these pages, I'm feeling them out too. It's been over a month, close to 6 weeks since I've had an IBS flare-up this time. It made it hard to digest quite literally and figuratively, but the lessons that are revealing themselves are immense. It feels strange to admit this, but my body these days feels like a blessing, completely my own in her imperfection, completely my own in her complexity. The lessons she gives me are designed for me. How lucky that we all get the machinery to liberate us from our ancestral patterns. Your body is speaking to you. I just had to learn to understand my own language first. There's a humility for me in unfolding the mystery of my body that reveals itself a little bit more each day. The chronicling, the tracking, and the achievement of listening to myself with openness and care has been profoundly healing. Because with this, I've also accepted myself. And it's a continuous journey of not assuming that I know an answer when I haven't even checked in or asked my body first. Just before the onset of the latest bout of IBS, I began to compost again. After my dear friend advised me to reintroduce it back into my life. As a child who was raised with composting, I felt sad that I had forgotten my ways. I felt sad for my mother, and I realized one day I could honor her. One way I could honor her was through remembering her for the good, valuable things she taught me. Since I was a child, she's been composting, gardening, tending to Mother Earth's body, but not her own. Maybe it's easier, safer to do that when you're so unwilling to prune the gardens of yourself. Not so surprisingly, my own ritual of composting began to shift something inside of me, as did paying attention to the cycle of the plants in my apartment or the freshness of fruits and vegetables in my fridge. The more I attuned myself to my environment, as well as other living beings in my environment, or even the dying plants that I was now no longer facelessly discarding, something inside of me also became more attuned to my patterns, and thereby the pattern of life, the cycle that connects us to the rhythm of the wind, the quiet purr of the fire, the way seasons change, and the surf of the ocean's whip. There's a softness and agility I've adopted through the cycle of composting. It has an intentionality to it, one that I crave, and a remembrance attached to it. Finding small ways to turn inward every action, even a small one, can become a ceremony. I'm learning there are so many ways to honor the physical, and a part of it is in honoring its voice. I'm learning that the Ayurvedic diet is my people's diet, and that ghee and khichdi, two things that have helped my IBS, are both integral parts of my culture's healing that I'm now accepting as my own. The way of my people are bringing me back to myself. Balancing ecosystems, whether on the land or in the gut, was an integral part of the cosmologies that grounded our ancestors, and an important reminder we need now. Disconnection from the land is disconnection from our gut. It's important to know how your body responds to the food you feed it, so you can be cognizant to yourself and the world holistically. I'm remembering this through the act of healing. I'm reclaiming my DNA. I'm remembering my people had it figured out. After a millennium of civilization quashed under colonial tyranny, it's important we remember what we were forced to lose. So I'm turning to them, my ancestors, and I'm learning to prioritize the ancient knowledge that determines the importance of the sacral center and the wisdom of my gut. These days, I remind myself that all I can do is be present with the situation at hand, to trust the cycles. I do as Bri Maya Tewari, Ayurvedic teacher and writer, did. I make a silent vow never again to sever my ties with the mother's rhythms. I commit myself to this body and to this earth.
Thank you so much.
Let me know
if you need a moment. I just wanted to say thank you so much for that beautiful reading, and for your vulnerability in reading what you stated was the most difficult chapter of the book to write. I think I encourage everybody to read the whole book, as I think it's a really phenomenally moving testimony that exemplifies how the personal is always political, through the way you link your personal history with these larger discussions about wellness, and its connection to spirituality, to very particular histories and cultures, while also analyzing the ways that these practices have been commodified, and not only analyzing that, but thinking through how to resist that, which I think for me personally is one of the biggest unresolved questions. And so if you're up for it, I wanted to ask some questions that came up for me while reading your book, many of which I think reflect on some of the points that came up in this chapter, but also just some of the larger questions that the book as a whole presented. And I also encourage anyone in the audience to please feel free to drop some questions into the chat, which we'll also be happy to address. So I think that the first, one of the first questions I had, and this is a rather large question, I think, without a single answer, but you discuss in the book the violence of the wellness industry, which I think is something that has been addressed, but is missing from a lot of the public discussions about wellness. And I was wondering if you could speak a little more about this, unpack this idea a bit more about the way that violence operates through the wellness industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I read a very vulnerable chapter, and the book is, it starts, there's like 4 major sections, and the first section is quite an intense section because I am talking about all the violences, and I'm sort of categorizing the ways in which, I mean, the simple explanation for the violences is that if you colonize a group of people for hundreds of years, not just, a decade, and, it's hundreds of years of systemic control that requires violence, undoubtedly. I mean, there's countless, massacres and slaughtering that happen, not only in India, as we know, but on the land that we all are probably on right now. Those are, histories and experiences that have parallels. And so I'm writing about sort of the ways in which South Asia or India, as a larger nation, was colonized, and what was stripped from us and from our own accessibility. I have a chapter on yoga, I have a chapter on meditation in the beginning sections, and all of them sort of really, both of those chapters really are about uncovering the explanation that I think I was always seeking from these spaces that I was going to from a very young age, because I was extremely traumatized and abused as a child. And so my sister and I were looking for escape. We were looking for spaces to be and to be accepted, and to find, connection with other people, and spaces of spirituality. I started doing yoga when I was 13. I started meditating around the same age as well. They were always white. Wherever I went, they were white spaces that didn't oftentimes acknowledge what, the Sanskrit text that they were saying, where was it from, or, what do these words mean, and what is meditation? Like, can we talk about that? And I think while I was doing research, I was just so moved that, 15,000 years ago, it's reported that men in India were going into caves and just thinking about what it means to be alive. And that through that evolutionary thought and through that process, they were able to come to all of these, very particular mythologies, meditation, yoga. Yoga is so dynamic. There's so many things that go into it. And of course, both of these histories also have very dangerous histories too, sort of rooted in caste. And all of that is important to acknowledge and talk about as well. So there's like a lot of things that we're circulating here. And I think that when anything, so there's the initial history is that it's colonized, and then that sort of added insult to injury now is that there isn't fair trade because we live in this concept of the global north and the global south. And global south is basically every country that's been colonized. And those resources are extracted. And because of, the World Trade Center, for example, or even the World Health organizations that are American entities, they have determined what is the rate of even a dollar to, India's currency, for example, or, Bangladesh's currency. They determine, no, your labor is less than, and therefore we pay you pennies, and then we charge, and when we take this back home to America, to England, wherever. And I think that's sort of the second experience of recolonization, or an added colonization of these methodologies, of these modalities. And that happens continuously, is happening continuously. People go to India for enlightenment, and they come back and they decide that they want to charge people, exorbitant amounts of money without ever even engaging with a community in India to sort of, be in a more fair and thoughtful, in integrity way of existing. And that happens all around the world. That's not just an American problem. But it is a colonial problem. It's a problem that goes back to thinking that I can take what is yours and I don't have to pay a fair cost because I decide what's fair. I mean, we have to sort of deconstruct what that means and the implications. While I was writing this book too, I want to name that almost over 1 million farmers were protesting in 2020 and 2021 during, sort of the worst months in India for the pandemic. COVID really was had like really awful bouts in India, and India was also making a lot of the vaccines. So there's like this like interesting, weird, other conversation there. But the farmers were protesting because they're making unlivable wages, and the current government in India, the Modi government, is trying to extract and take more from Indian farmers. So, and Indian farmers are the reason we have turmeric or ginger, specific kinds of ginger, so many different things, ashwagandha, language or like words that are now very commonly used in our wellness spaces, but we don't think of the costs and the implications on the people who are doing this work for us. And so the whole book really is sort of an acknowledgement of that, and a questioning of, Lexi, what you're saying, like what is next, or like how do we move through this? The whole book is sort of a questioning of that. And I do have answers. I think that, it's about one, acknowledgement, but it's also just course correcting. We don't have to live in such an extractive world. We have to understand that we once lived in cohabitation with each other and through the land, with the land. There was once, before this current time, before the impact of colonization, we lived in our own communities. We coexisted with one another. And of course, there were internal wars, and we can talk about sort of all of the human realities of that. But that decision, and I think it's a very dangerous decision, and it's the decision that I sort of contemplate in the book that has created the trying to find a connection with the earth, with communities, with local people. But here, I think it's like the answer is really sort of to live in accordance with the earth. And that means also to go and seek Indigenous folks, to seek their lead and their wisdom, their education. I think that hasn't happened. There's so much, and I speak about this in the book, and it's a big thing to claim, but it's true. I mean, this is an empire. The American empire is an empire. We're living amidst it. And there are many ways that empires fall, but like, that's not the point. The point is there's a way for us. Capitalism is like 200 years old. There is a way that we can go back to a time that is more aligned with how we once lived. And I think that especially on colonized land, it's always about Indigenous folks and what they can teach us, what they how they can show us and guide us and tell us about the wisdom of also like living through apocalyptic times, to lose everything and to begin again, to find information that was purposely for decades, for generations, destroyed. I mean, they're reclaiming so much. And these are, Indigenous traditions, but there's so much, there's so many tribes throughout America, North America, these are happening in collective spaces all around this giant land, and it's amazing. And when I speak to Indigenous folks, that's when I do feel the most rewarded by the resistance, because you see that it's happening, and you see that it's available, and you see that they're, and it's not just Indigenous folks, there's many people that are living with the land, and learning how to farm for themselves, learning how to raise animals, how to have gardens, how to compost, as I was writing about. These are ways in which we can individually, and if we live, in a city, it's like choosing to be more involved with your community, like having a connection to your neighbors, having a connection to your local community garden. There's so many across New York, for example, a city like New York. There's collective ways that we can begin to live, but I think that a lot of people are overwhelmed by even the initial work, and that disappoints me. And this book is really an answer to that, because I didn't have a choice. And the reason why I love reading such a personal chapter is because, I mean, I do encourage everyone to read the entire book, because it's not just that. It's very research oriented, and it's quite heavy with information at times, but I weave in and out of emotions because or my emotional truth and my story, because I had a really crazy life, and I was forced through chronic illness, through just, trauma, through the realities of not having a family, because I was so harmed by my own family. It forced me to live more radically. It forced me to think outside of the box. I don't have comfort. And so I've had to make comfort for myself, and that means that I have to be more intentional with how I live. So I think that that's something that I ask everyone to do. Move into the discomfort and find a way to live radically. A lot of us have not even tried. And I think we're already tired by the work, and resistance revolution is like lifetime work. It's like, if we think of the revolutionaries that came before us, they have to do it. There's no other way. And it is all consuming, as you said, Lexi. It's totalizing. And that is a violent experience. I'm not to, I don't want to argue with that. It's true. It's depressing. I mean, that's the whole orchestration of capitalism. It wants to crush you. It wants to make you feel like, well, I am compliant. And yes, in a way we all are, but that doesn't mean that it just ends there. There are so many ways to resist it, even through that compliance. And I think a lot of that has to do with reimagining, which goes back to sort of Indigenous folks, or even, Indigenous folks. I think a lot of people are coming back to their Indigenous roots, like not just in the Americas, in all around the world. And I think that kind of action of like, whether you're Irish, whether you're Serbian, whether you're Indian, whether you're Bangladeshi, you are finding that truth inside of you, and you're understanding that it's tied to lineages of information and pre-colonial information that you can return to, and you can begin to sort of determine your own path in your own life. And it doesn't have to be in the ways in which you're being told to live. And that's exciting. There's so much possibility. And I am very moved by that.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to see if anybody in the audience had a question, or you, Ash, had a question you wanted to ask. I see one comment saying, thanking you, Fariha, for your story. It's deeply profound. You're beautiful and truly amazing. So that's one comment. Yeah,
I love how you brought up care work. Obviously, another good point of reference is the body keeps score. Do you have anything else to further the research that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, the book is very, very heavy with research. Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No was one of the most profound books I've ever read. He speaks to so much of what I speak about, like IBS I learned from him was so rooted in trauma, and it was rooted in a past that, the reason I wrote this book, for example, is I didn't want it to be so personal. Actually, I actually wanted it to be just like a concise excavation of the wellness industrial complex, because I hadn't seen that yet. And as I started to write and do my own research, I researched this book technically for about like 5 to 7 years. I was like constantly thinking about it because I was writing about self-care a lot, and that kind of got me to wellness. And the more I started to think about, like, hang on a second, these are all the modalities that I was raised with, and these are things that come from my culture. Why am I not seeing more South Asians in these yoga classes, in these meditation classes? The more I started to think about that, the more I started to be like, something's really wrong here. And then that made me start to think about my own life and things that I had just accepted. And that fragmentation, all of that was the process of writing the book. The fragmentation kind of helped. And research and books were so integral in that. So When the Body Says No, Leah Lakshmi Samarinha's book Care Work is so important. I think that the work of Adrienne Marie Brown is integral to like our time. Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism are both really great books. And Robin Wall Kimmerer is such an important elder and person, and her book Braiding Sweetgrass was very, very important through the process of writing this book. Love and Rage by Lamarod Owens was also important to me. What else? I had one. I referenced just a lot of thinkers and writers, and I owe so much of my my thought process to all of these incredible books that I read through the research of this book. But yeah, all of it's really in the book. So I would just say, read the book. Get a chance to read the book.
Yeah, I will say I added a bunch of titles to my library, cool. order list. And I think, when thinking about like a politics of citation, this book really does that work in such a fantastic way. It's a great reference list. So maybe we have just a few minutes, and I wanted to just ask you one last question. But in thinking about this exhibition, which is you know, in artworks in different media and sculpture, film, photography, and then thinking about your work as a poet, what role do you think art has to play in this? Like, what can art offer? It's something that I've been asked by people seeing the exhibition too, you know, like, what is this doing? And I think it's always a question we ask ourselves. But yeah, do you have something to say about this?
God, I have so much to say. Yeah. Also, you know, I also thank you for saying that about the book, Lexi. Like, I really, I knew people would come for me, and so I wanted all of the research to be so clear. So yeah, that's why the book is very research and very like, I love citations. But for art and the impact of art or the importance of art, art determines human evolution. If you look at us through time, that is the only determining factor of like evolutionary processing, because art is the reflection of the immense the immensity of what we hold as humans and what we're comprehending, contemplating. You know, I think philosophy is art. I think people like Plato, you know, Socrates, they were artists in a way. And I think that storytellers, Herodotus, like all of these people through time, Ibn Sina, through the Muslim world, like travelers, people that were going into communities and talking and documenting, they were artists. They were storytelling is a form of art. And as a writer, as a poet, as a multidisciplinary artist, I take extreme care in what I make and put out into the world, because I know that it is a signal to other people of you know, the messaging that I'm trying to put out there. I went to school to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. I dropped out of school. I hated it so much. And all of that hunger and passion for a better world was put into my writing, was put into my art making. And I think that art has to be political. If it's not interesting. You're not talking about anything. That's my opinion. I'm not, and I think all art has a way of changing the world. And you know, people like Octavia Butler, you know, thinking about literally like writing about things that came true. It's wild. It's like this idea of like time traveling and what it means to write and what it means to make art. You have to believe in that thing, you know, you have to believe in what is true, and to give people that hope, to give people that language, the language that maybe they don't have, to give people the imagery, to give people the kind of chance to think about something that maybe they've never had access to thinking. That's revolution right there. You know, revolution happens in so many small ways. And I want to sort of end with that, you know, like the revolution of the self, you know, this idea of like, you start here in order to go outward. You have to, because you have to face yourself in order to be revolutionary. And I think art, the best kind of art, faces itself, and the best kind of art looks to you. It's both, it's me in the mirror, you know, it's like I am a reflection of you. And if I reflect the best of me, or if I show that even through this darkness, through this hardness, through this pain, through this grief, through this trauma, I have healed, or I am healing. I don't know if I will ever heal. I don't know if I agree with that term even, but like I am healing. I'm in the act of healing. I have found evolution in my own ways, and I continue to. That hope that I'm seeding in these words in this book is a reflection of what can happen in somebody else. So art is everything, you know. I think it's everything. I think it's the only way that we can change the world. You know, politicians are not going to do shit for us. So, you know, I think that the world that we want, we should fight for it through art and through, you know, actually fighting. Yeah, art is everything.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to end also by calling everyone's attention to Fariha's new book coming out. When it's
October 17th.
October 17th, very soon. Survival Takes a Wild Imagination. We've added some links to where you can buy the book from independent bookstores. And of course, you can also purchase the book, Who is Wellness For, which Fariha was the book that Fariha read from. Yeah, I just want to thank you again so much for joining us and for this really enlightening discussion that I think really adds a new perspective to the exhibition and to all the things we've been discussing so far. This has really deepened a lot of what we've been thinking about, discussing, talking about. Yeah, it was really, really fantastic.
Thank you, Lexi. Thank you for coming, everyone. I appreciate the intimacy. It's great. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you, everyone.